When I first heard the high-pitched snarl of an ATV engine tearing across my soybean field at 6 in the morning, I figured some teenager had gotten lost. Maybe a farm kid thought it would be funny to joyride through my crop rows. But when I stepped outside in my pajamas and saw a grown woman in designer sunglasses, blasting music from a Bluetooth speaker strapped to her handlebars, I knew two things right away. 1, this wasn't a mistake. 2, she was coming back. I didn't know her name yet, but that morning she waved at me like she owned the place while crushing half an acre of sprouts under her wheels. By the time I reached the edge of the porch to yell, she was already gone, leaving behind a trail of snapped plants, shredded earth, and a strong whiff of strawberry vape. That was the moment I knew this story wouldn't end with a fence or a polite conversation. It would end with horns. Real ones. I tried to be civil. I really did. I walked over to the nearest house the next day and knocked, hoping to find some reasonable adult I could talk to. A teenager opened the door, then shouted for his aunt. When she appeared, I recognized her immediately. The sunglasses, the attitude, the ATV helmet hanging from her elbow like a trophy. She leaned against the doorframe and listened to my concerns with the expression of someone being forced to watch a documentary on paint drying. I told her she was damaging my crops, risking fines, and trespassing. She shrugged. I asked her politely to stop. She smirked. Then she told me to prove it. That's when I realized who I was dealing with. Not a rogue thrill-seeker, but a full-blown entitlement storm in yoga pants. Her name was Amanda, but she introduced herself with the phrase I'm sure you've heard 100 times if you've ever dealt with a Karen. She said I'm friends with the mayor and HOA president, so you might want to back off. I blinked. She stared. Then she told me my field was boring and empty, and she'd be back tomorrow. It was the kind of interaction that leaves you blinking in disbelief long after the door slams shut. My blood pressure rose every time I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot. Especially the next morning when the sound of that engine came screaming back across the field, this time with her dog riding shotgun in a milk crate duct-taped to the back. For the next week, it was like living in a real-life video game where I was the slow-moving obstacle and she was the boss level with infinite respawns. No matter what time I came out, there she was, kicking up dirt, flattening my irrigation markers, weaving in and out of scarecrow posts like she was in a motocross championship. I tried taking photos. She flipped me off. I tried putting up signs. She ran them over. Once, I even caught her laughing while live streaming the ride on her phone. I reported her to the local sheriff's department, but the deputy just gave me a half-hearted promise to follow up. The mayor's niece, it turned out, had more immunity than a diplomat with diplomatic plate. Every attempt I made to reason with her only seemed to encourage her more. Things got worse. She started bringing friends. One morning, I counted 3 ATVs crisscrossing my field like it was their personal playground. They brought coolers, parked under my oak tree, and set up folding chairs like it was a picnic spot. I called animal control when her unleashed dog started chasing my chickens. They said they'd make a note. I put up a barbed wire fence. They ran it over. By the end of the second week, I'd lost almost 10% of my crop, and my mental health was balancing on the edge of a shovel handle. Then came the final straw. Or, more accurately, the final tire. It had rained hard the night before. The earth was soft and sticky, the kind of soil that swallows boots and spits out socks. At dawn, I heard the familiar roar and walked out with my coffee cup steaming in hand. Amanda was back. But this time, she wasn't moving. Her ATV had sunk halfway into a mud pit I'd been prepping for a new irrigation line. She was standing on top of my scarecrow pole, screaming into her phone and flailing her arms like she was auditioning for a horror movie. I thought she was being dramatic until I saw what had her so terrified. There was something moving slowly through the tall grass nearby. Something massive, brown, and snorting like a dragon with allergies. That was the first time in years I saw the beast stir. Beast wasn't his real name. His name was Toro, a retired rodeo bull I'd adopted when he was deemed too ornery for the circuit. He was massive, black as night with a white blaze on his forehead and the kind of shoulders that could flatten a small car. Normally, he stayed in the upper pasture, well away from the fields. But thanks to the rain and a broken latch, Toro had found his way into the southern stretch of land. And there, with Amanda frozen on the scarecrow post and her ATV stranded in the muck, Toro emerged like the final boss of karma. She screamed. I sipped my coffee. Toro didn't charge. He just stared. Calm. Curious. Judging maybe. Amanda lost her mind. She started yelling at me, threatening lawsuits, calling me names I won't repeat. I waved and offered her a rope. She refused. Instead, she called her boyfriend, her lawyer, and I think a psychic at one point. Meanwhile, Toro turned and walked away, unimpressed. But the damage was done. Amanda had been humbled, if only for a moment, and I had caught the entire scene on my field cam. That day changed everything. Suddenly, Amanda stopped riding through the field. Not because she respected me. No, because she was terrified the bull might be watching. She started calling the police on me, accusing me of training an animal to stalk her. Animal control visited again, this time laughing as they reviewed the footage. They confirmed Toro had done nothing wrong. But they warned me, if I used him as a scare tactic, there could be consequences. I nodded, smiled, and then started planning something a little more elaborate. Because when Amanda returned, and I knew she would, I wouldn't just rely on dumb luck or soft mud. I was going to let the beast loose the right way. Trained, baited, and broadcast for the world to see. This wasn't just a turf war anymore. It was a showdown. My field, my bull, her entitlement. And this time, karma wouldn't be walking away. It'd be charging in horns first. The silence that followed Amanda's ATV getting stuck was short-lived. It lasted maybe 2 days. Long enough for me to reseed the trench she had plowed through my west crop row, and just long enough for me to get comfortable with the idea that maybe she had finally learned her lesson. Maybe standing on a scarecrow pole while a 1-ton bull stared her down had knocked some sense into her. I even thought, stupidly, that the situation might resolve itself with no more drama. But I should have known better. Entitled people don't retreat. They regroup. And Amanda came back swinging, not with her ATV this time, but with threats, noise, and enough spite to curdle fresh milk. It started with passive-aggressive retaliation. The first was at the local feed store, where I've been a regular for years. I walked in to pick up fencing supplies and was greeted with awkward glances from the cashier and whispers near the chick brooder. Then, out of nowhere, Amanda burst in wearing yoga gear and a pair of muddy boots like she'd just escaped from a discount survival show. She marched up to the counter and pointed directly at me, declaring in a voice that carried like a sermon at a revival tent that I was a menace to the neighborhood. She told the clerk I had a trained attack bull, that I was some kind of livestock lunatic who terrorized local women. She demanded they stop selling me supplies. The entire store went silent. And then the manager, a man who'd known me for 20 years, asked her to leave before he called the police. She stormed out muttering something about Yelp reviews and legal action. That afternoon, my mailbox had 3 new envelopes. One from the HOA, one from Animal Control, and one from a law office with a name that sounded like it belonged to a reality TV show contestant. The HOA letter accused me of creating an unsafe environment by allowing aggressive agricultural elements to roam free. I reread that phrase 3 times and laughed so hard I nearly choked on my iced tea. The animal control notice was another complaint Amanda had filed, claiming Toro had been unleashed as a weapon. The law firm letter was a cease and desist written in legal jargon, so poorly structured it read like it was generated by a third-rate chatbot. I tacked them all to my fridge under a magnet shaped like a cow. New decorations. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. If Amanda wanted drama, I was going to give her a stage she couldn't handle. My first move was petty, I admit that. But when someone repeatedly drives a 4-wheeled engine of destruction through your livelihood, you stop aiming for maturity and start aiming for impact. I ordered a dozen garden gnomes online. Not the cute ones. These were hideous, hand-painted monstrosities with angry eyes and crooked grins. I placed them in a straight line right down the area where Amanda usually entered the field. Each gnome held a different tool, one with a shovel, one with a rake, one holding a tiny sign that said "Trespassers will be tilled." It looked ridiculous. That was the point. Amanda's reaction was better than I could have hoped for. I didn't even have to witness it in person. My field cam caught the whole thing. She pulled up on foot, saw the gnomes, screamed something unintelligible, and kicked the first one so hard it flew 10 feet and shattered. Then she tripped over another and landed in the mud, covered from shoulder to knee in swampy sludge. I laughed until my ribs hurt. But of course, she used that incident as more ammunition. She filed yet another complaint, this time claiming my gnomes were designed to cause physical harm. I framed a still from the footage of her falling, and put it on my wall. Title: Karma Takes a Tumble. Next, I tried actual deterrent. I spent a weekend digging mock trenches in the parts of the field she favored most. They weren't deep enough to hurt anyone but enough to rattle her wheels. I spaced them unevenly and disguised them with light straw covering. The idea was to make it feel like she was hitting potholes, throw her rhythm off, maybe even get her to turn around. But Amanda was like a cockroach in an obstacle course. No matter what I put in her way, she just powered through. At one point, I watched her ATV go airborne over a trench like it was a motocross ramp. She landed crooked, tipped, but somehow didn't crash. I started suspecting she was fueled not by gasoline, but by pure entitlement. It wasn't just my land she was affecting either. Neighbors started asking questions. One woman, whose property bordered mine, stopped me at the gas station and asked if I knew anything about the person tearing through the back trails behind her barn. Apparently Amanda had expanded her route, cutting through fence gaps and grazing areas. Another neighbor told me their dog had chased an ATV off their property late at night, and the rider had screamed about being harassed. The pieces were coming together. Amanda wasn't just using my field. She was carving a personal highway through the entire block. I decided it was time to hit her with something undeniable. I installed new trail cams, this time with high-resolution night vision and motion alert. I even used an old weatherproof box to disguise one as a birdhouse. Within a week, I had enough footage to make a short film. Amanda riding in at sunrise, drifting between rows, looping around hay bales, and even stopping to selfie with my cows like they were theme park attractions. One clip showed her tossing an empty soda can into my compost pile. Another had her dog digging a hole in my vegetable pat. The woman treated my land like an adventure park crossed with a landfill. But the real kicker came when I spotted something glinting from the corner of my workshop roof. A small camera. Not mine. I climbed up, examined it, and found it broadcasting to a cloud-based app. Amanda had planted surveillance on my own property, presumably to catch me in some act of revenge or retaliation she could use against me. I yanked the thing off, turned it toward the road, and left it recording the neighbor's sprinkler system. I hope she enjoyed the footage of plastic flamingos getting misted every morning. By the end of the week, I had documented every angle I needed. And I had a new plan. The gnomes were fun. The trenches were amusing. But I wanted something bigger. Something poetic. I was going to bring Toro back into the spotlight, this time with purpose. But not recklessly. I wanted to do it smart, safe, and completely legal. Amanda had trampled all over my patience. Now it was time to let the bull take over. I wasn't going to just wait for her to stumble into him again. I was going to bait her into it. And this time, she wouldn't be able to play the victim. Because this time, she'd walk straight into the horns by choice. Toro hadn't seen real action in nearly 3 years. He was a legend once, the kind of bull that rodeo announcers warned about before anyone ever stepped foot in the arena. They'd call his name with a mixture of admiration and fear, and riders would silently pray they'd be assigned someone else. After being retired from competition, Toro had been sold off to a rancher friend of mine who couldn't handle his attitude. That's how he ended up with me, a last resort rehoming for a bull too stubborn, too smart, and too aggressive for most hands. At first, I kept him in a reinforced pen far away from my working field. He didn't like people, didn't trust noise, and had a tendency to charge anything with wheels. It took 6 months before he let me get within 10 feet without snorting like a freight train. But once we understood each other, Toro became manageable, almost like a grumpy roommate who didn't want to be bothered unless it was feeding time. He wasn't a pet, not even close, but there was a strange mutual respect between us. And now, with Amanda turning my land into her personal racetrack, it was time to bring Toro back. I didn't want to just unleash him like some cartoon villain. I wanted this to be strategic. I started with simple conditioning. Every time Amanda's ATV screeched across my property, I'd bring Toro to the fence line, stand there with him, and let him watch. He'd stare at the moving machine like it owed him money. I'd give him a treat every time he stomped or snorted at the sound. The idea was to reawaken that instinct buried deep in him, the one that used to flare up at the sound of loud engines and bright movement. Within days, he started pacing the fence every morning like he was waiting for her. I didn't even need to train him much. The noise did it all. Amanda's sense of superiority was revving up my secret weapon with every lap she took. Things escalated fast. One weekend, the local community held a small barbecue event at the neighborhood park just down the road. Nothing fancy, just some folding tables, a grill, and folks from the surrounding properties coming together. I brought some corn and a few pies, planning to enjoy a quiet evening. Amanda showed up wearing a jacket that said "Ride Free" in rhinestones and started telling anyone who would listen about the trauma she suffered on my field. She claimed I had weaponized livestock, that I was a danger to society, and that her therapist had diagnosed her with bull-induced stress disorder. She might have made that up on the spot. Her performance would have been entertaining if it weren't so wildly dishonest. What really made the evening memorable, though, was when Toro decided he was tired of hearing her voice from across the property line. The wind must have carried the scent or the sound. I never figured out what set him off exactly, but midway through Amanda's story about how I trained Toro to recognize her perfume, we all heard the crash. A loud, metallic thud, followed by the unmistakable groan of splintering wood. Toro had broken the gate. I sprinted toward the sound as Amanda screamed and ran toward her car. Everyone else scattered, unsure if this was some farm-themed entertainment or an actual emergency. Toro didn't chase anyone. He just stood at the edge of the lot, snorting and pawing the ground like he was claiming it for himself. I calmed him down before animal control showed up, but Amanda had already posted the event on social media, calling it an assassination attempt via livestock. She uploaded it with dramatic music and slow-motion effects, which, ironically, made her look like the villain in a nature documentary. To my surprise, the animal control officers who arrived weren't angry. In fact, one of them pulled me aside and asked if he could take a selfie with Toro. Apparently, they'd heard stories about the bull and were curious if he was really as dramatic as the reports claimed. After reviewing the footage from my cams and seeing Toro hadn't charged or even crossed the property line, they chalked it up to a busted latch and left with a warning to double-check my fencing. Amanda, of course, was furious. She told the officers I had trained the bull like some kind of homestead hitman. They didn't take her seriously. If anything, they seemed amused. But I knew she wasn't done. Amanda never backed down quietly. What I didn't expect was the surveillance. A few days after the incident, I spotted a strange glint near the barn roof. Climbing up, I discovered a camera that didn't belong to me. It was mounted on a swivel, battery-powered, and clearly pointed at my property. Amanda had planted it there, probably hoping to catch Toro misbehaving. Instead, I turned it around and let it record my scarecrow for a few days, then added a sign under it that said "Hope you like watching me weed." The next morning, the camera was gone. A few days later, I found a new one disguised inside a fake birdhouse. That one I took down and mailed to the HOA with a note that said please stop spying on my compost pile. They never responded, but the cameras didn't reappear. Amanda tried to escalate again, this time bringing her boyfriend along. He arrived in a BMW that looked like it had never touched a dirt road and stepped out with the self-importance of a man who had just discovered a Wi-Fi signal in the woods. He introduced himself as a legal consultant, though he never actually said he was a lawyer. He told me Amanda was considering a harassment suit and that I should prepare for legal consequences if I didn't restrain Toro. I asked him if Amanda was planning to stop driving her ATV through my property. He said no. Apparently, she believed she had established a pattern of use, and that my field was technically unregulated common land. I asked if he was serious. He said he was drafting a letter. I smiled, handed him a fresh copy of my deed, and wished him luck. As all of this played out, I noticed something new in Toro. He wasn't just reacting to noise anymore. He was watching, thinking, waiting. I'd never seen that level of calculation in a bull before. He'd stare at the field like he was remembering. Amanda had become part of his routine, part of his daily landscape, and I had the growing suspicion that if she crossed his path again, he wouldn't just stand still. He'd do something about it. That idea both excited and worried me. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. But I also didn't want to keep living like my own land was a game board for someone else's chaos. The final push came when I caught Amanda bragging at the local diner. I was sitting 3 booths over, minding my business, when I heard her say she'd be making one last ride soon, a big loop for her online followers. She said she'd show that psycho farmer he couldn't scare her off. I watched her wave her phone around, laughing, probably unaware I was within earshot. That's when I decided it was time. No more gnomes. No more ditches. This wouldn't be a prank. It would be a demonstration. One that couldn't be ignored. Toro wasn't a tool. He was a consequence. And Amanda was about to meet him on his terms. It took me 3 days to prepare the field. Not because it needed to be elaborate, but because I wanted it to be precise. Toro wasn't a circus act or a scare tactic anymore. He was part of a statement. I mapped out the area Amanda usually entered from, lined it with new trail cams, and made sure every inch of footage was backed up in the cloud. I reinforced the old fencing to keep Toro contained until the right moment and installed a custom gate on a remote release I rigged together from an old garage door opener and a fishing line pulley system. It wasn't high-tech, but it would work. This wasn't just revenge. It was theater. And Amanda, whether she knew it or not, was about to be center stage. The morning of the big event, I noticed something strange. Amanda wasn't alone. She rolled up to her usual entry point with 2 ATVs behind her, one carrying a woman wearing leopard print leggings and a GoPro strapped to her head, and the other with none other than her so-called boyfriend/legal consultant. The man looked ridiculous, dressed in loafers, khakis, and a sport coat that had no business being within 30 miles of a soybean field. Amanda was already filming herself with a ring light duct-taped to the front bar of her ATV, narrating some fake documentary about reclaiming public land. She didn't realize it, but the show had already begun. I stood in the distance, hidden behind a hay bale stack, watching the scene unfold with a cup of coffee and Toro chewing grass beside me like a calm bomb waiting for ignition. Amanda revved her engine, pointed toward the field, and shouted something about not being intimidated. The other 2 followed, laughing like they were on a joyride. That was my cue. I walked over to Toro, patted his shoulder, and gave him a look we both understood. Then I pressed the remote. The gate creaked open with a metallic groan. Toro didn't charge. He didn't storm out like a monster. He walked. Purposeful. Heavy. Silent. His hooves left impressions in the soft dirt with every step, and his eyes locked onto the ATV convoy like he'd been expecting them. He cut across the rows slowly at first, moving diagonally, a living shadow moving through gold. Amanda didn't see him until he was maybe 30 yards away. The moment she noticed, her expression froze. Her bravado snapped like a twig underfoot. She tried to accelerate, but her front wheels hit one of the soft trenches I'd dug weeks earlier. Her ATV jolted, tilted, and she nearly flipped. The other two skidded to a stop behind her, unsure whether to go back or forward. That's when Toro broke into a trot. Not a charge, not yet. Just enough to make his mass very, very clear. Amanda screamed something about animal control. The boyfriend shouted at me from across the field, waving his arms like a broken windmill, yelling legal jargon that got swallowed by the roar of Toro's breath. I stayed silent. Let it unfold. Toro kept moving. Amanda tried to reverse, but her wheels just spun mud. The woman behind her jumped off her ATV and sprinted for the fence line, slipping twice. The boyfriend was halfway through dialing his phone when Toro stopped just a few feet from Amanda's stalled machine. He stared. She stared back. For a full 10 seconds, nobody breathed. And then he bellowed. It was a sound that vibrated through the ground, deep and primal, the kind of sound that made birds take flight and your spine twitch involuntarily. Amanda let go of the handlebars, crawled off the ATV, and backed away with her hands raised like she was being mugged. She screamed again, something about how this was harassment, that she'd get the sheriff down here. She didn't know the sheriff had already called me the night before and wished me luck, having seen the last 6 complaints she'd filed get thrown out like junk mail. Toro didn't move. He let her retreat. Slowly. She stumbled backward into the boyfriend, who was still yelling into his phone, probably to someone who had no clue what to do about a bull and 3 idiots stuck in the middle of private farmland. The moment they all cleared the trench line and crossed back into the public path, Toro turned and walked back toward me as if clocking out for a shift. It was over. But the story wasn't. The cameras had captured everything in crystal clarity. Amanda's entitled speech, the ridiculous entrance, the scream, the stall, the stare down, and the retreat. No violence. No danger. Just consequence. Real, unscripted, undeniable consequence. I posted the footage anonymously that afternoon on EntitledPeople Reddit, giving the backstory, the lead-up, and the names blurred out but the behavior completely unfiltered. The post blew up in hours. By evening, I had over 1 million views. People commented like wildfire, calling Toro the Justice Bull and Amanda the ATV Karen. The backlash came quick. Amanda tried to get ahead of the narrative by posting her own video, a heavily edited cut where she cried and claimed she was being bullied, targeted, stalked by livestock. She included soft music, captions, and even a segment where she looked into the camera and said, "I don't feel safe anymore in this community." But the internet wasn't buying it. They had already seen the raw version. The comments flooded her post. People shared Toro memes, reenacted the encounter with toy bulls, and even started a hashtag, "Let the bull cook." By the end of the week, Amanda had shut down her social media and, according to one of the neighbors, had quietly moved her ATV to a storage unit across town. The boyfriend hadn't been seen since. The woman with the GoPro posted a separate apology video, distancing herself and explaining she thought they were just going to ride trails, not provoke a farmer. She added that Toro's stare gave her nightmares. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The HOA, now facing community embarrassment and legal pressure from multiple property owners, issued a formal statement. They disavowed Amanda's behavior and sent me a letter thanking me for my patience. As part of their peace offering, they funded a custom metal sign that I now have installed at the entrance of my land. It reads "Private property. No trespassing. Trespassers will be bullied." The image on it? Toro, standing proudly in profile. It's become a local attraction. People take selfies with it. I didn't do any of it for fame. I did it for peace. For the right to live on my land without being trampled by noise, disrespect, or the belief that rules don't apply to the loudest voice in the room. Toro, for all his size and fury, never hurt a soul. He just showed up, existed, made his presence known. And sometimes that's all you need to stop the chaos. Amanda hasn't been back since. My field is quiet now. Crops are growing again. And every morning, Toro and I take a walk along the fence line. He seems calmer these days, like a storm that finally passed. I toss him an apple, he flicks his tail, and we both watch the sunrise without a single engine interrupting it. The sun rose slowly over the eastern hills, casting long amber streaks across the freshly tilled soil, and for the first time in months, the morning wasn't interrupted by the distant snarl of an ATV engine. No dust clouds, no sudden revs, no chaos tearing through my rows. Just peace. The kind of silence that hums rather than echoes, that fills you rather than isolates you. It was almost hard to believe it had taken a 1-ton bull and a global internet audience to get it back, but here we were, me, my coffee, and Toro, watching the world wake up without a single Karen in sight. After the viral post hit EntitledPeople Reddit, things had snowballed fast. I'd uploaded it under a throwaway username, mostly for catharsis, never expecting it to reach beyond the usual daily drama digest. But something about it struck a nerve. Maybe it was the combination of ridiculous entitlement, rural justice, and the fact that my bull stood his ground like a seasoned philosopher fed up with society. Within hours, the comments flooded in. People wanted updates, backstory, even merchandise. Someone turned the confrontation into an animated short where Toro was voiced by Morgan Freeman. I didn't know whether to be flattered or worried. The original video was reposted on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and even a few farming enthusiast forums. It exploded. Thousands praised the simplicity of the solution, some called it poetic justice, and a few even asked if they could visit the field in person. My inbox filled up with messages from strangers around the world saying it was the best use of livestock they'd ever seen. And somewhere in the madness, the HOA began to panic. Not because they cared about my property or the rules, but because their name started trending, and not in a way they liked. Their official website was bombarded with traffic. Posts and memes mocked their prior inaction and favoritism. Local reporters started sniffing around, asking questions about why a private landowner had to resort to defensive livestock to secure his rights. That's when the letters started. First came the apology, generic, templated, signed by the HOA president who once ignored 3 of my complaints. It was followed by a peace offering in the form of a laminated certificate recognizing my commitment to community harmony. I nearly framed it as a joke. Then came the more serious message, a formal acknowledgement that Amanda had violated multiple property agreements and was no longer considered in good standing. Word was she had quietly left town the week after the video hit 1 million views. Meanwhile, Toro had become a local legend. Kids drew chalk pictures of him on sidewalk. Someone dressed up as him for a community costume day, wearing a cardboard box with horns and yelling "no trespassing" like a battle cry. One elderly woman from 2 towns over mailed me a hand-knitted sweater with Toro's face on the front and the phrase "let the bull cook" stitched on the sleeve. It was completely ridiculous and also the warmest sweater I own. Amanda, for her part, did what most people in her position do when the internet turns on them. First, she doubled down, releasing a polished, overdramatic video in which she painted herself as a victim of rural aggression, suggesting I had manipulated public opinion and twisted the truth for fame. She even tried to rebrand herself as a kind of off-road rights activist, saying people deserved access to unused land for recreational purposes. But no one bought it. Her previous footage, the live stream from her GoPro friend, the countless videos from my own cameras, everything contradicted her claims. And when her ex-boyfriend leaked text messages revealing that she had bragged about getting away with trashing my fields for weeks, the final nail hit the coffin. Her social media vanished. Her influence evaporated. She didn't just lose the public. She lost the attention she thrived on. I thought things would settle there. But life has a funny way of stretching the consequences just a little further. A few weeks later, I was contacted by a small production company that wanted to make a segment about landowner rights and rural justice for a web docu-series. At first, I said no. I didn't want the circus. But they insisted it would be respectful, honest, and focused more on the legal gray areas that allowed people like Amanda to push boundaries without consequence. Eventually, I agreed under one condition. Toro had to be the center of the story. They came out, filmed for 2 days, and left smiling. The crew even brought apples for Toro, who basked in the attention like a seasoned celebrity. The episode aired quietly but gained traction, and before long, someone from a national agriculture network reached out about showcasing Toro during a segment on famous farm animals. I didn't think bulls could blush, but if they could, Toro would have then. Despite the absurdity, life returned to normal in the best way. My fields healed. The crops grew again. My mornings were quiet. And Toro settled back into his old routine, watching the hills with that same slow, deliberate awareness that had made him both terrifying and fascinating. He still walked the perimeter sometimes, not out of aggression but habit, and maybe deep down a little pride, because he had done something most people couldn't. He'd changed the story. Sometimes I'd get visitors, people driving from nearby towns just to snap a picture of the now iconic sign the HOA had installed as part of their truce. It stood near the main path Amanda once used, gleaming under the sun with polished metal letters that read private property. No trespassing. Trespassers will be bullied. Next to it stood a life-sized steel sculpture of Toro that some local artist had donated after seeing the viral video. He called it Field Justice. It was crude and rusted, but somehow perfect. I never wanted fame. I never wanted trouble. All I wanted was my land, my peace, my morning coffee without the sound of entitlement ripping through the earth. And thanks to Toro, I had that again. The final chapter wasn't about revenge or internet clout. It was about restoration, reclaiming space, reminding people that even the quiet ones, the ones who live off the beaten path, who mind their own business, have limits. And sometimes they come with horns. As summer turned to fall, I walked the field with Toro beside me, the sky painted with streaks of orange and gold. We didn't speak, obviously, but if I had to guess, I'd say Toro felt it too. The sense that balance had returned. That for all the nonsense and noise, something good had come out of it. He stopped near the old scarecrow post where Amanda had once perched like a confused bird trying to escape her own decisions. I laughed quietly. Toro snorted. The wind rustled through the corn. And in that moment, nothing in the world could touch us. Peace, after all, isn't the absence of conflict. Sometimes, it's the presence of a bull with perfect timing.